You are a Mongol general. You have spent 20 years in the saddle, witnessing horrors that would shatter a lesser mind. You have seen great cities reduced to ash, heard the collective scream of thousands dying at once, watched rivers thicken and slow with the red sludge of slaughter. Nothing shocks you anymore. You believe you have become hollow, numb to the carnage. But then, one day in 1220, standing amidst the smoking ruins of Bukhara, one of the world's crowning jewels, you watch your Kagan, the man you would follow into the throat of hell itself, give an order. It is not an order to kill. It is not an order to burn. It is an order so methodical, so coldly calculated, and so administratively perfect that for the first time in your battle-hardened life, you feel a sensation you thought you had buried long ago. Horror. Not at the violence, you're used to violence, but at the system behind it. Because what Genghis Khan did to the people of Bukhara wasn't just brutal, it was something far more disturbing. It was legal, it was organised, and it was justified by the very same laws that promised equality and justice for his own people. This is not a story about a barbarian. This is the story of how a boy who wore a slave's heavy wooden yoke became the man who built the largest continuous land empire in human history, on a foundation of industrialized human trafficking. And the truly terrifying part is that the system he created was so effective, so rational, so perfectly designed, that even today scholars struggle to reconcile the progressive lawgiver with the architect of systematic dehumanization. You need to understand this, because Genghis Khan's approach to slavery was infinitely more dangerous than simple savagery. It was the invention of a bureaucracy of suffering. Let me drag you back to the 1170s, to the frozen, unforgiving steppes of Mongolia. A teenager named Temujin sits in absolute darkness. His neck and wrists are locked in a heavy wooden kang, a torture device designed for livestock, not humans. The rough wood eats into his flesh, festering with sweat and grime. He cannot lie down comfortably. He cannot feed himself. He cannot even wipe the flies from his face. Every night he is dragged to a different tent, passed around like a piece of luggage, a living trophy proving that his captors have broken his clan. He is no longer a person. He is an object in a wooden cage. But here is the detail that matters. While most prisoners in this hell would be consumed by madness or fantasies of bloody revenge, young Temujin is studying. He is watching the guards. He notices that they get drunk, that their discipline is fragile, that on the night of a sacred festival when the air is thick with celebration, the system of security collapses. He waits, and on that night, he makes his move. But he doesn't just run, he leverages a social bond, convincing a sympathetic captor to aid him. Even in chains, Temujin was mastering the art that would define his empire, understanding the mechanics of power and using that knowledge with surgical ruthlessness. But the Kangwei wasn't his first lesson in powerlessness. Years earlier, when Temujin was just 9 years old, his father Yasuge was murdered, poisoned by rivals at a feast, the ultimate violation of steppe hospitality. In that moment, the world tilted. His father's clan held a council. These were men who had sworn loyalty to his family, men who had shared bread and blood. And one by one, they looked at Temujin's mother Holun and her 5 small children, and they performed a cold calculation. These 6 mouths were no longer an asset. They were a liability, a deficit in the ledger. So they left them. In the middle of the biting winter on the open steppe, they abandoned a woman and 5 children to what should have been a certain freezing death. Holun kept them alive through sheer feral will. She taught them to dig for roots until their fingers bled, to trap marmots, to eat things that were not food but would stop the stomach from cramping. A clan leader's widow, reduced to foraging like a desperate animal. But young Temujin learned something else during those starvation years. He learned that every social bond, every sacred tradition, every oath of loyalty meant absolutely nothing when survival was on the line. The only thing that mattered was power. Raw, undeniable, terrifying power. The kind of power that made betrayal impossible because the cost was too high. These traumas, the abandonment, the enslavement, the escape, forged a singular, icy clarity in Temujin's mind. He didn't just want revenge. He didn't just want to be a chief. He wanted to rebuild society itself according to a completely different logic. Traditional Mongol society was a web of family and tribe. Your loyalty was to your blood. But Temujin knew that blood was cheap. He knew family would leave you to freeze. He knew the system was broken, so he began to envision something radical, a society where loyalty wasn't based on lineage but on law, where advancement wasn't based on who your father was but on merit and absolute obedience, where betrayal wasn't just shameful, it was impossible, because the punishment was so swift and so total that the very thought of it would turn a man's blood to ice. But here is the dark foundation of that vision, the flaw in the diamond. If you're going to reorganize society from scratch, you must draw a line. You must define who is inside the protection of the law and who is outside. And Temujin, the boy who had been treated as less than human, was about to draw that line in blood. The year is 1206. After decades of brutal internecine warfare, Temujin has done the impossible. He has conquered or absorbed every major tribe on the Mongolian steppe. The constant raids, the vendettas, the cycle of revenge that had paralysed Mongol life for centuries, it is over. A great assembly, a Kurultai, is called by the Onon River. Under a white banner with 9 tails, Temujin is proclaimed Genghis Khan, oceanic ruler, the universal king. But Genghis doesn't celebrate with a feast. His first act is an act of legislation. He announces the Yasa, the great law that will govern this new nation. When historians first audit the Yasa, they are often seduced by its apparent progressiveness. For the 13th century, it seems shockingly modern. First, it became illegal to kidnap women, ending the endemic practice of bride abduction. Women gained property rights. Adultery was punishable by death for both men and women equally. Second, it declared all children legitimate, regardless of whether they were born to a wife or a concubine. In a world obsessed with bloodlines, this was revolutionary. It meant a child born to a slave could rise to command armies. Third, it mandated total religious tolerance. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and shamanists could practice without fear. Fourth, it established a meritocracy. A shepherd could become a general if he had the mind for war. And perhaps most tellingly, it became illegal for any Mongol to be enslaved. If a Mongol was found in chains, any other Mongol was legally obligated to free them. Reading these laws, you might think Genghis Khan was building a utopia born of his own suffering. You might think he had learned empathy. You would be catastrophically wrong. Because buried in the Yasa were the quiet clauses, the ones that reveal the true architecture of his new world. The same law that forbade the enslavement of Mongols implicitly authorized the total enslavement of non-Mongols. The law that mandated freeing a Mongol slave prescribed the death penalty for anyone who helped a non-Mongol slave escape. Religious tolerance existed only as long as you paid your taxes and provided tribute, and very often that tribute was human flesh. He didn't abolish slavery, he nationalized it. He created a binary world, Mongols who were citizens, with rights, and everyone else who existed in a legal grey zone where they were not quite people, but assets to be managed. To enforce this, he dismantled the tribes. He reorganized the entire population into a decimal system. The Arban, 10 men, the Zun, 100, the Mingan, 1,000, and the Tumen, 10,000. Your commander was no longer your clan chief. He was an officer appointed by the Khan. Loyalty to the state replaced loyalty to the family, and to bind them, he instituted collective responsibility. If one man in a unit of 10 fled battle, the other 9 were executed. If the unit of 10 failed, the unit of 100 paid the price. It was a machine built on the engineering of fear. It made betrayal not just dangerous to the individual, but a death sentence for everyone they loved. The system was tested early by a governor named Kurchi. Genghis had appointed Kurchi to rule the forest tribes of Siberia. Kurchi was effective. The tribute flowed, the order was kept, but Kurchi had a vice. He began abducting local women for his personal harem, dozens of them. The local tribes, pushed past their breaking point, rebelled and killed him. Now, remember the Yasa. Kidnapping women was illegal. Kurchi had broken the law. But when the news reached Genghis Khan, he didn't praise the tribes for upholding justice. He didn't condemn Kurchi for his crimes. He sent an army to crush the rebellion into dust. The message was brutally clear. Kurchi's crime wasn't the abduction of women. His crime was incompetence. His crime was creating administrative friction. The Yasa protected Mongol women. Everyone else was simply inventory. His generals, men who had bought into the justice of the Yasa, began to realize that the law was not a moral code. It was an operating system for efficiency. It was designed to create a frictionless engine of conquest. But they didn't fully grasp the scale of the horror until they reached Bukhara. Let me place you there. It is 1220. Bukhara is a metropolis of the Islamic Golden Age. Its libraries hold the wisdom of centuries. Its artisans forge steel that is the envy of kings. Its markets smell of spices and silk. 30,000 people live behind walls deemed impregnable. Genghis Khan arrives not like a warrior, but like a force of nature. He does not storm the walls immediately. He cuts the supply lines. He waits. He diverts a river to flood the moat. When the city falls, the citadel holds out for 12 days, but the end is inevitable. When the resistance is finally crushed, Genghis rides his horse directly into the Grand Mosque. He watches his soldiers dump the Holy Qurans onto the floor and use the carved prayer chests as feed troughs for their horses. He orders the city's elite, the scholars, the merchants, the imams, into the courtyard. Imagine standing there. You have watched your civilization collapse in a week, and now this short, unremarkable man with eyes like flat stones speaks to you. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. It is a masterstroke of psychological dominance. He is reframing their own theology to justify their destruction. But then, the slaughter does not happen. Not the chaotic, random slaughter you expect. Instead, the Mongols begin to sort. The entire population of Bukhara is driven out of the city and onto the plain. They are not people anymore. They are data points to be processed. Category 1. The specialists. Artisans, weavers, blacksmiths, engineers, scribes. These people are valuable. Their names are registered in a ledger. They are told they will be marched to Karakorum, the Mongol capital, to work for the Khan. They are saved, but they are now state property, human tools to be used until they break. Category 2. The young men. These are separated and formed into labour battalions, but labour is a euphemism. They are the Hashar, the human shields. In the next siege, these men of Bukhara will be forced to march in front of the Mongol lines. They will fill the moats with bundles of straw and their own bodies. They will catch the first volley of arrows so a Mongol trooper doesn't have to. It is psychological torture weaponized. The defenders of the next city will look down and see their own neighbours being whipped forward to destroy them. Category 3. Women and children. The attractive are distributed as prizes to the troops or sent to the slave markets of the Silk Road. The children are often adopted, not out of charity, but to be raised as Mongols, erasing their culture and turning them into loyal soldiers for the next generation. Category 4. The remainder. The elderly, the sick, the unskilled. They are simply liquidated, erased. As a Mongol general watching this, the realization hits you like a physical blow. This isn't war, this is a harvest. You're looking at the industrialization of human misery. The Yasa, the law you were so proud of, was never meant to be a universal declaration of human rights. It was a contract for a closed circle. Inside the circle, order and justice. Outside the circle, everything and everyone is a resource to be extracted. This system, this bureaucracy of slavery, was terrifyingly effective. It transformed the Mongol army from a raiding party into a self-sustaining empire. The Hashar saved Mongol lives, allowing them to conquer fortified cities with minimal casualties. The artisans built a capital city, Karakorum, that rivaled the courts of Europe, filled with stolen genius. The registry system allowed the Khans to move human capital across the continent like chess pieces. A Russian goldsmith might find himself working next to a Chinese engineer in a workshop in Central Asia. It was the first globalized workforce bound in chains. The system created a hierarchy among the slaves themselves, a stroke of psychological genius. The artisans looked down on the labourers. The labourers were terrified of becoming Hashar. The domestic servants felt superior to the field hands. By creating layers of privilege within the enslaved population, Genghis Khan ensured they would compete with each other for scraps of security rather than uniting against him. They policed themselves, and the reputation of this system, the stories of the sorting, became a weapon in itself. Cities began to surrender before the first arrow was fired. They knew that if they fought, they faced the Hashar. If they submitted, they merely paid a tax in human lives. The terror of the audit was enough to break the will of nations. This system outlived Genghis. His sons and grandsons perfected it. Kublai Khan in China, Hulagu in Baghdad, the Golden Horde in Russia, they all used the ledger, the sorting, the quota. For 600 years, elements of this system persisted. So how do we judge this man? In Mongolia, he is the father of the nation, the man who brought law and order to the chaos, and he was, under his rule, trade flourished, crime vanished, and a Mongol could walk from one end of the empire to the other with a gold plate on his head and never be robbed. But that Pax Mongolica was built on the piled corpses of millions and the enslaved backs of millions more. It is tempting to dismiss him as a monster, but monsters are wild, chaotic things. Genghis Khan was rational, he was an architect, and that is what makes him truly sleepless night-inducing. We must ask ourselves the uncomfortable question, is this dynamic really gone? The logic of the Yasa, progressive laws for us, exploitation for them, is the hidden engine of history. The colonial empires of the 19th century operated on it. Republics that proclaimed all men are created equal, while holding millions in bondage operated on it. Modern economies that rely on invisible, underpaid labour in distant lands operate on it. We draw a circle. We create a zone of law and rights for those inside, and we treat those outside as resources. Genghis Khan didn't invent this hypocrisy, but he stripped it of all its pretences and perfected it into a weapon of mass conquest. The story of the boy and the kangi is not just ancient history, it is a warning. It demonstrates how easily the human mind can rationalise organised cruelty when it's dressed up in the language of law, efficiency and necessity. The Mongol generals watched the sorting of Bukhara, and they didn't stop it. They entered the data into the ledgers, they balanced the books, because the system was too big, too efficient and too profitable to question. If you want to understand the true mechanics of power, you have to look past the battles and look at the bureaucracy. You have to look at the ledger. If you believe that the darkest chapters of history deserve to be read in full light, subscribe to the ledger of shadows. We don't sanitize the past here, we exhume it. We will see you in the next investigation.